As Brother Dan said, we are in Genesis chapters 9 and 10. The title lesson this morning is The Failures of Our Ancestors. The key verse, Genesis 11 and 9, therefore is the name of it called Babel or Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. The application, the student will understand the long shadows of sin and see how the sins of his ancestors still affect his life today. Brother Dan read there in Revelation 18, 1 through 5, and it wasn't that long ago that we went through Revelation. We looked at chapter 18, actually several chapters that covered Babylon the Great, the sins of Babylon, the false doctrines and teachings, and I think a lot of that really has its beginnings in these chapters that we'll look at here in Genesis. The early chapters of Genesis cover very quickly, very briefly, several thousand years. When you look at the creation of Adam and Eve, and you look at the lineage that's given there, we don't have a lot of detail about that time. But what we do have is what God deemed important for us to see, in that God made a perfect earth with perfect sinless man, and it was no time at all that sin entered the picture. We see, again, very swiftly by chapter 6, in fact, in chapter 4, we see the first murder. Chapter 3 is the fall of man. Chapter 4 is the first murder. And we see very quickly the deterioration of society during that time. And in fact, in the New Testament, it harkens back to before the flood, as it was in that day shall it be, in prophecy. Several thousand years. There are genealogies given. However, and we're going to look at some genealogies this morning. Keep in mind, this is not, if any of you do the Ancestry.com or those different sites, that's not the intention here. So as we look at these generations, we'll say, for all intents and purposes, it's really highlighting significant individuals. Okay, so, for the U.S., 200 years plus, we might look at George Washington. We might fast forward to Thomas Jefferson, to Abraham Lincoln, to Roosevelt, Teddy Franklin. Fast forward on up through our time today. It's not necessarily trying to capture for us for a genealogy or a tree. Okay, if that makes sense to you. What's being pictured here for us are individuals and events of significance. And so keep that in mind as you look at these. Again, the first part, there were several thousand years prior to the flood. As we look at this, now what was the lifespan of these individuals? When we look at Methuselah, how old did Methuselah live? 969 years. 969 years. And there were several that lived for extensive periods of time. We will see that the flood created a lot of change. Some change that's very evident, obvious. I believe that it cut the Grand Canyon. I don't believe the false religion of evolution that the Grand Canyon was cut by a little stream over the course of millions of years. But I believe it was cut by a dramatic event. And I think science indicates the very same thing. True science. For those that want to deny God, they come up with fiction. just state it like that. As we looked last week and we see that the ark came to rest. We had the flood, the ark came to rest, and Noah and his family eventually emerged from the ark. We see he had 3 sons. They were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we're going to see here, beginning in chapters 10 and chapter 11, we're going to see the beginning of the replenishing of the earth. Again, keeping in mind that when they came off the ark, they were given an instruction. What was that? Yeah, to replenish the earth. They were to spread and replenish the earth. That was the charge that was given to them. And I believe that they initially began that route. However, it sort of fell to the wayside very quickly as we look at these verses. I think I covered everything today. So, why don't we go ahead and get into chapter 10 and take a look at this. And again, I hope you had some time. There is a lot here. I hope you had some time to go in and study the lesson. Page 56 and 57 are actually a couple of aids to help us to sort through the information that's given to us. But again, I want to be very clear that I don't think that all of this is, you can't go person to person to person necessarily. There's individuals that are listed here that have no lineage indicated. Is that because they had no children? I think it's simply that God didn't necessarily see the need or fit for us to have that lineage given to us. All right, so let's go ahead and begin, and instead of, we'll just sort of try to push through chapter 10 and get to chapter 11. So, beginning in chapter 10, verse 1, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Unto them were sons born after the flood. And keep in mind, Old Testament times, generally, the lineage is defined by the sons. There are rare occasions where a daughter may be mentioned, or perhaps a wife may be mentioned, but typically it traces through the sons. Begins with Japheth. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshach, and Tiras. And I apologize ahead of time. These pronunciations hopefully are close, but I wouldn't say that they're exact. And the sons of Gomer. So verse 2 lists the sons of Japheth. Then verse 3, the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodan. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their family, in their nations. So, sons of Japheth, very short listing. But he actually lists 7 sons. Of those 7 sons, there's only 2 of those sons that he lists the lineage of. And those 2 are, and again, you can refer to page 6 in your quarterly if you'd like. Those sons are Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. Now, some of these names may sound very familiar. Some of them, there's a lot of Michaels around. I don't know if you've noticed that. There's a lot of Jameses. There's a lot of Davids. The same was true back at that time. There may be other individuals named in the scriptures of the same name. But in addition to that, some of these have a lot of similarity to cities and nations at some point in time. And some are directly associated with it or as a result of that individual. Some, I don't want to say coincidental, but it may not have any connection with the city at all. Now, verse 5 tells us something specifically here. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. So, the sons of Japheth is the father of, as identified in verse 5. Not names of the sons, but in verse 5, Gentiles. By these were the isles of the Gentiles. Now, what's that mean, isles? It means more than what you may think. What do we think of an isle? Island. But the word actually incorporates in it also coastal areas. So, islands and coastal lands. Now, just sort of aside, there's a lot of thought as to the migration of these families. Greek literature actually identifies Japheth as their ancestor. Gomer is indicated that it settled north of the Black Sea. Magog, northeast of the Caspian Sea. Now, I don't know if geography, does everybody have in their mind where these are? Well, very good. I don't know that I can tell you exactly either. But, you know, when you think of the Middle East, the Holy Land, the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea for you, the Caspian Sea, and the regions to the north of those. Most of what we're given is in relationship to that Middle Eastern area. And the regions moving further out. Magog was Caspian Sea, Madai, the Medes and the Persians. So you recall that from our studies of Babylon and them being overrun by the Medes and the Persians, and they were sort of northeast from Israel, the lands there. Meshach is not identified specifically. Tyrus is identified with the Aegean Islands, and that would be the north of the Mediterranean around the Greece regions, Greece and Turkey. And I'm not going to try to go through and identify. These are what many scholars have identified down through time. And again, these may not be exactly correct. Also, keep in mind that these people, when you trace your lineage back, who are you tracing your lineage back through? Japheth. However, you may very well have some lineage that comes from any of these others too. There has been much mixing of the races over time. So this is really just generalized information. So again, Japheth is described as Indo-European. And so the European lands and over into India and those regions. Any thoughts or questions? All right. Try to move faster through Ham and Shem. Verse 6, and the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah, and Sapta, and Ramah, and Sabekah, and the sons of Raman, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. So here we have in verse 7, verse 6 says the sons of Ham are Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. We remember Canaan from last week's study. Canaan was cursed for what Ham had done. And Moses here, and maybe I should pause. The writer of this is whom? Moses. And did he live at this time? No. He was in the lineage of Abraham several generations down. And he is looking back when he's writing this from a specific perspective, that of Hebrew or Israelite. Okay? So keep that in mind. What he has is true for us. However, it is from his perspective that he's sharing this with us. And so you're going to see, again, guided by God, emphasis in certain areas. All right, so Canaan, the sons of Cush are listed in 7. Seba, Havilah, Sabta, and Ramah, Sabeka, and the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. And again, you can see those on page 56. This is pretty much listed out as it's given in chapter 10. Pause. Verse 8. And Cush begat Nimrod. So verse 7 gives the sons of Nimrod, with the exception of, the sons of Cush, with the exception of Nimrod, which is called out specifically. Why? Because God, through Noah, decided we needed to know about Nimrod. It says here in verse 8, he begat Nimrod. He, Nimrod, began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Shinar. We'll go on in a minute, but let's talk about this real quick. Cush begat Nimrod. The name Nimrod means rebellion, or rebellion. It says here, he was a mighty one in the earth. What does that mean? Yeah, he was significant. He was significant. He carried a lot of weight. Now it goes on to say in verse 9, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now what is that referring to? Well, there's two thoughts. One is that he was very good in hunting animals, deer or whatever. The other thought is that Nimrod was a hunter or an influencer over men. Could be that he was both. We definitely know, based on what we'll continue to read about Nimrod, is he was a significant influencer over men. And in fact, it says here, he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Verse 10, and the beginning of his kingdom. His kingdom. He was an influencer of men. Was Babel. And I think most of us are familiar with the city of Babel. The Tower of Babel. But it wasn't just Babel, or Babel, however you want to pronounce it, but also Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. I think most of us have sort of a vague idea of where Babel was, the Tower of Babel, southeast of Baghdad, to present-day Baghdad. But these other cities were in that same region of Shinar. And these were all cities that Nimrod was the founder of. Now, what was the command of Noah and his sons? That they would spread and populate the earth. Noah was a husbandman, which meant what? He was a... I'm sorry? Farmer. Yeah. However, what we find here with Nimrod is the mention here that of these building of cities. But not just in the land of Shinar. Verse 11 goes on and says, out of that land went forth, referring to Nimrod, Asher, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, the same is a great city. It didn't stop just in the land or the region of Shinar, but also went northwest from there into what would have been Assyria at the time. That's Asher. And there he builded Nineveh. Now you're familiar with Nineveh. Jonah and Nineveh. Jonah was sent to preach to a rebellious and ungodly people. In fact, we had a message at the Central States on his anyway, his attitude toward the people of Nineveh. There were 4 more cities that he built. Some of these became very prominent cities. Nineveh certainly was a prominent city, became the capital of the Assyrian Empire. So again, Nimrod is specifically being called out because of these events and events that would follow here. So keep that in mind as we go on. Verse 13, and Mizraim begat Lidam and Anamim and Lahaban and Naphtahum. It's easier to pronounce these when you're studying it silently to yourself. And Pathruzim and Casluhim, out of whom came Philistim, which would be whom? What people? Philistines, that were a pain in the side for the Israelites. And Caphtorim. And Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. And the Jebusite. Where were the Jebusites? Jerusalem. Yeah, prior to it being named Jerusalem. Prior to, they were there when David and Joab conquered Jerusalem. And the Amorite, and the Girgasite, and there's a lot of ites that came from Canaan. The Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite, and afterward were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, and that's on the Mediterranean coast, Lebanon, and down as thou comest to Gerar unto Gaza. You're familiar with Gaza, it's in the news, Gaza Strip. As thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah, and Zeboam, even unto Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. Now, Canaanites, who lived in the land when Moses brought the children of Israel out of Egypt to go into the promised land, the Canaanites. They included a lot of different tribes, a lot of different families that were in there. Think about their practices. What were they guilty of? Idolatry. False worship. It went into sacrifice, but not sacrifice according to the law given by God, but sacrifice of human infants. and also all kinds of ritual sexual acts that were included in their religious celebrations. So keep that in mind. Canaan was also the one that was cursed due to Ham's sin. Keep that in mind. Any thoughts, comments, or questions before we move on? So if you think about these children of Ham, we think of North Africa, Western Arabia, the Persian Gulf, and then the land of Canaan, there, Palestine today, it's referred to. All right. And again, a lot of names that are very familiar. We see them come into the history of Israel as we go down the road. Verse 21, unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Jephthah, the elder, even to him were children born. Now Eber's mentioned here, but you'll see that Eber is actually down that chain, verse 56. However, he's significant as we study through this, and in fact, Abraham is the father of what people? Consider what people? The Israelites. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, but they're referred to as the Hebrew children, and that name Hebrew comes from the name Eber. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Jephthah, the elder, even to him were children born. The children of Shem, Elam, and Asher, and Arphaxad. And Arphaxad is a lineage that follows through Eber, through Abraham. And Lud and Aram. And again, as we go through these lineages, you'll find, and you can see it on page 56, that there's really only two lineages that are given. One is Aram, and then we have an extensive history of Eber because of the significance of the Hebrew children. Okay. Verse 23, and the children of Aram, Uz. Who is from Uz? Somebody lived in Uz, and we're going to study about him starting next week. Job. I thought I heard somebody say Job. Yeah. So again, significance here. The children of Aram, Uz and Ho and Gether and Mash, and Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber, from whose name we get the Hebrew. And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's names were Joktan. So, let's stop just for a second. So, Eber had two sons. The name of one was Peleg. The other was Joktan. Tell me about Peleg. What's the significance of Peleg?
He begot Abram, the division of the land.
Yeah, Abram comes through his line, but during his days, contemporary to while he was living, what happened? In his days was the earth divided. Again, there's two thoughts on this. The earth divided referred to the land, the division of the continents. The second correlates to chapter 11. It could be that his name is referring to one or the other, or to both. And I can't tell you. Anyway, it was during his time that this occurred. And his brother's name was Joktan, and Joktan begat Almadad, and Sheleph, and Hazer Maveth, and Jerah, and Hadaram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Adamal, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. He had 13 of them. Again, stress. These others may have had many, it was, in this time, what was the family's economy built around?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. When did the Industrial Revolution occur?
Much later.
1900s. Up until then, economies were built off of agriculture, basically. Okay? And so, where did you get most of your workers? From the family. You had lots of kids. Why? Because they were assets to you. You owned them. It's not that way anymore. Kids own us. That's terrible. So, as you look at these, those that are listed without kids, it doesn't mean they didn't have kids. And in fact, on some of these, they may have had more kids than what's listed. Why wouldn't they have listed all of them? Because the significance might not have been there for us to spend our time. So, if you think that this is boring, just keep this in mind. God thought it was important enough for us to know it that He reserved space within His Word to preserve it and give it to us, to deliver it to us. So, I realize sometimes, this tripping and stumbling over the names, the genealogies can be mind-boggling at times. I appreciate the effort that was put in on page 56 to lay some of this out. I jotted some notes down along with it. For Shem, keep in mind that it's only the line of Arphaxad that comes through Eber and that comes down through Abram that we have the children of Israel down through Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 Hebrew children. There's a lot of others in here that are not listed, but these are basically, as was mentioned previously, these are the Orientals and Mid-Easterns, the Semitics. Any comments or questions? All right, there will be a test at the end. I would fail it if there was. Even if it was open book, I would probably fail. All right, so here it says, verse 30, and their dwelling was from Mesha, as thou goest unto Sephar, a mount of the east. These are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. So we have genealogies that span here quite some time. We'll start getting an idea, a little bit of an idea, as we get over in the latter part of chapter 11. But keep in mind, we talked about Methuselah and many of those prior to the flood that lived over 900 years. We don't see that after the flood. And in fact, we see in a time that the lifespans will dramatically decline. I mentioned last week, if we lived 900 years, 900 plus years, up to nearly 1,000 years, that would have meant I could have been born in the year 1100 and still be alive today. Think about the changes that have occurred in that time. All right. Any other comments, thoughts, questions? All right. I would like, before we skip to chapter 11, before we go to chapter 11, flip over to Acts chapter 1, beginning in verse 18. And I'd like for someone to read through, better get to Acts chapter 1, from 18 through 25 in Acts chapter 1.
Through 25.
18 through 25.
Now this man purchased a field with the reward.
I'm sorry. I wrote Acts 1. How about Romans 1?
Okay.
I think you'll like that better.
Well, yeah, it's fine. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. They changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen.
All right. Again, this is very familiar to us. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. There has always been truth. Truth is firmly planted in whom? God. In God. God is truth. The New Testament refers to Jesus Christ as the way, the truth, and the life. He being God. However, man has continually sidetracked, gone away from the truth. Evidenced here in Paul's writing to the Romans, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. The earth itself and our own being testify of the existence and the truth of God, and yet they deny it. The invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Is there any better description of man today? Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, denying God, denying his creation. Verse 23, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, to birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things. What's that referring to? Idols that were made. They were carved out of stone. They were carved out of wood. They were made from precious jewels. Has it stopped? No. There are religions today that worship idols. Images of people or images of things. Again, I went to India. They have 3,000 different gods in Hindu culture. 3,000 gods. No wonder the people are poor. How do you support that many gods? All right, that's intended to be fun. Why would we think that the creation is greater than the Creator? And yet that's what man has made, even enlightened men today. want to make man higher than the Creator. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies through themselves. So, go back. What does that have to do? We're going to see what Paul's talking about occurring here in chapter 11. Verse 1, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. Now, we already looked. Shinar was mentioned previously. Who built cities in the land of Shinar? Nimrod. Nimrod built cities in the land of Shinar. And they dwelt there. That wasn't their intent. They left the ark. They began to move. But then they came to a spot. Today we refer to it as the Fertile Crescent. They came to a spot, a plain in the land of Shinar, and they stopped and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime, and had they for mortar. Now, going back to verse 1, the whole earth was of one language. How did that happen? How many languages did they have before the flood? I don't know. I don't know. It might have been one. It might have been multiple. I don't know. But I do know that there was only a family that came through the flood. Noah and his sons and their wives. And do you think they spoke the same language? Yes. So there was one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed, they stopped. Said, here's a nice place. Reminds you a little bit of Lot, right? How did that turn out? Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, but not due to Lot, but they found a plain, Shinar, they dwelt there. They said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. So, let's stop and talk about this. What's the problem? Not obeying God. They stopped. They didn't stop having kids, but they stopped in a place instead of spreading out across the earth that God had created. And it was there that they began to build a city. Who was going to build a city? What's it say?
They were making bricks. They were doing it all, man. They were.
Let us. Let us. It's all about us. Isn't that what we're told today? The me generation. It has infected all of us. It's not just a generation, but it is man. Man, absent God, is all about self. Let us build us a city. We'll do it. It'll be for us, for our benefit. What should our attitude be? Let us worship and serve God. Let us give Him honor and glory. And again, we have to be careful because it infects us. Let us build a nice house. Let us go do the things that are pleasurable to the flesh and forget the things of the Spirit. Let us focus on me and the things I want to do instead of the things that God has told us to do. We get a little infected ourselves. Even as Christians, we tend to get infected with money, possession, fame, fortune. I love Indiana Jones, but what was he after? Fame and fortune. I love the movies. I don't know that I love Indiana Jones. All right, anyway. Let us what they believe that tower might have looked like. And part of the reason is because they have located these in their archaeological excavations in the region of Shinar, or Iraq, in that area. They've, I think, have found 4 of them there, which would equate, again, we talk about Sodom and Gomorrah as being destroyed by hail and brimstone, but there is archaeological indication that there were at least 5 other cities that were destroyed the same way, same time. Sodom and Gomorrah were the 2 most significant and were tied in with Lot, and therefore were given those. But historically, there were more that were involved. Tower of Babel, that may have been the initial, the greatest, the one that was pushed forward, and they may have been attempting to build others of the same type. I don't know. Certainly, Nimrod was influential over at least 4 cities in the land of Shinar, and then in Assyria, 4 more cities. So, they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. Several scholars said this is actually in the plural, the heavens. Let us make us a name. What was their purpose? Glorify themselves. Make themselves significant. How do you make yourself significant before a pure and just and all-powerful God? You know, we concern ourselves too often with being significant. I want to make a place in this world. I want my name to stand out. I want people to look at me with respect. We tend to have that attitude. But what's really more important is how we influence people to look upon God and not ourselves. Let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad. Show our strength and our power upon the face of the whole earth. Verse 5, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the people of men builded. Now, did he actually come down? Does God need to come into our presence here to know what we're doing? What we're thinking? No, I think it's more symbolic of his close examination, inspection. You know, in talking about Job, he tells Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Inspect. Take a close look and see. God knows every intimate detail of us. Not just those that are saved, but those that are lost too. God cares about all mankind. All men. And I use that in a generic sense. He loves all men. He wants them all to come to the knowledge of his Son, Jesus Christ, who shed his blood on the cross. He desires that every man recognize the sacrifice that Jesus gave and accept Jesus as their personal Savior. That is God's desire of man. Here, he says, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they began to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. What's he saying in this verse? This sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? Behold, all the people are one. What do we call that? They are united. They're unified. You know, wouldn't it be good if America was united and unified? We're divided. Well, it depends. What course?
Depends on what they're unified on.
That's exactly right. Depends on what they're unified on. We can go down this path, unified, and that's good. We can go down that path, unified, and that's bad. And I'm afraid that we followed this. I forget which one I said was. Anyway, yeah, the bad path, thank you. I'm afraid that we've gone down a bad path. We continue to move further and further away from God. Now here, this is in the time of Nimrod. Where is Nimrod in the generations? Well, we have Noah. Ham came over on the ark through the flood. He had a son by the name of Cush, and Cush had a son by the name of, he had several, but one of them was Nimrod. How many generations is that? Yeah. And if you consider Cush coming across in the flood, it's one. How deep is, how do I say this? How quickly could Brookside Missionary Baptist Church go from teaching the truth to teaching falsehoods? We're one generation away. That's why it's so important as we lose those that have been strong in the work, in the Word, that we have others stepping up and filling the gaps. That means our young people have to have a desire to know and understand God's Word and to do it. To do it. They're all one people. They have all one language. What's the benefit or downside of that? It means it's unified with one language. There are no barriers there. There's nothing to slow them down. There's not a communication issue. This they will begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. How far can man go in their imaginations? Romans chapter 1 that we read to start this chapter told us. All the way down to the depravity of man. And guess what? We've reached it. Alright, very quickly. Verse 7, let us go down and there confound their language that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them. So from there we see, as chapter 10 told us of the lineages and then told us of where they spread, this is after the scattering that God caused in verse 8. The Lord scattered them them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. False religion, Babel. There were many ancient teachings that came out of that false religion and this effort that man began there with Nimrod that carries on through and it's present today and was spoken of in those verses that Brother Dan read in the devotional reading. Mother Babylon, harlot Babylon. All right, the rest of the chapter deals more specifically with the descendants of Shem, and you'll see there where we were talking about men living 900 plus years. Shem lived 600 years, and we go through those generations, and we find that when we get down, Peleg lived after he begat Ru 209 years and begat sons and daughters, and he lived, and Ru lived 2 and 30 years and begat Serug, and he lived afterward 207 years, so we're already down in the 200 plus years. Son of Man had already knocked off 700 years of man's life. It is probably a good thing today that men don't live 900 years in the face of the sinfulness of man.